Good evening and welcome to Real Talk with Kaisha. And today's topic is women's history and mental health. So thank you for joining. And so I want to start with the history of women's mental health awareness. So for centuries, there was stigmatization, misdiagnosis, and mistreatment when it came to mental health and women. And truthfully, then when COVID-19 hit, it even became worse. So when it comes to mental health and suffering, women mainly used to suffer in silence. They would not complain. They would just have to handle the things they had to handle. And still, to a certain extent, we still do that. Women continue to face challenges built on centuries of medical mismanagement of their own health. And so not only am I talking about women suffering in silence over the centuries and not sharing about mental health because it was known as, they would say that women had hysteria, like that we would be just out of control. And it was really, really mislabeled and everything. And so not only that, we also dealt with years and years and years of the doctors not understanding how to medically treat us. Like, for instance, hormones and something like PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And usually it's like PMS on steroids, which is really, really, now it's understood, but for centuries it was not understood. And unfortunately, then the pandemic hit, and then women were expected to take on professional roles and still maintain the domestic responsibilities that they had to with little physical or financial assistance. And most women had to work from home and take care of the kids. So, we all know was a struggle. Like, the kids were doing homeschooling while the women were working, while you had to maintain a house. So you had to create these boundaries. And it was really difficult. But anyway, so unfortunately, the response has been very sexist in the past and definitely disregarded womanhood and womankind when it came to mental health specifically, I'm talking about. And so over the years, obviously, between the harmful attitudes, the stigmas, the falsehood around the challenges that women faced when it comes to mental health, thankfully, some of that has changed. But it wasn't until the late 20th century that people actually began to recognize and validate women's mental health issues. As women began to challenge societal norms and centuries-old gender roles, women's health awareness became more and more important. And it became a global talking point. But there was women who actually had to stand up and fight for people to listen to us and take notice that we had things that we were dealing with beyond just our gender role of being a wife and a mother and taking care of a home. We had to deal with things like anxiety and depression and other mental illnesses. Remember that some of the mental illnesses come also from genetics. So if your parents had anxiety, it's more likely that you have anxiety. If your parents have depression, more likely that you have depression. Sometimes it skips a generation, but if there's family members that actually have had some of these mental health issues, it is more likely that you're going to have it. So women had to stand up for themselves. I mean, we had to over the centuries have had to fight for everything, the right to work, I was reading something the other day and I was devastated that I read two things that were really troubling to me. One was that women could not open their own credit card without their husband going with them to actually sign for it. And I was like, what? And guess what? That was all the way into the 1970s. And I can't even believe that. I mean, I was born in the 1970s. So when I read that, I was like, really, like, I couldn't believe it. And I said, I have credit cards. I couldn't even imagine not being able to get my own credit card. The second thing that was troubling was women fought during the suffrage movement. Women fought to have the right to vote. And lo and behold, women then, it was written in the Constitution for women to have it was a bill and a law passed that women were able to vote. But guess what? Not women of color, not Asian women, Native American women, Hispanic women, still were not able to vote until after the civil rights movement. So I think that women have faced more and more challenges, and now finally people are listening, and that's why Women's History Month is so important in March. Now, the third issue that I had was the fact that today, 2022, women still make 82 cents to every dollar that a man makes. Even in the same position, that's an issue. When we talk about gender inequality, that's an issue. And that causes strain and stress on a woman and their mental health needs. I mean, if you have to be a single mother raising a child, you should get equal pay, truthfully. If you're qualified, you should get equal pay, period, across the board, no matter what race or gender you are. So, over time, obviously, there was many people that fought. Why? Because more than 1 in 5 women in the United States experience some type of mental health condition, such as depression or anxiety. And and then there's some that affect women more than men, and I'm about to share that with you. Before I go into that, there are a few people that I want to mention that are important in women's history. So there are 6 female mental health heroes throughout Women's History Month. I mean, there's more than 6, but these are the 6 that I'm going to share with you today. They were pioneers in the field of mental health specifically. One is Nellie Bly, but her name that she was born with was Elizabeth Jane Cochran. And I mean, a lot of people know about her. She's a crowd favorite, especially because she was an investigative journalist who, after hearing of the horrible conditions for patients at a New York State asylum, she posed as an insane, like she posed as a patient in order to get herself admitted. And after 10 days of being inpatient, she wrote about her experiences in an expose for the New York World. Her report was the catalyst for lasting and widespread mental health reform and was later published in book form as 10 Days in a Madhouse. So that was definitely pioneering in the mental health field, bringing light some serious troubling issues within inpatient hospitalization and the way women were treated in regards to their mental health needs. And then the second person I want to mention is Anna Freud, who was, yes, the daughter of Sigmund Freud that we all know. And she pushed for an expanded focus on children's mental health. She really wanted people to take children's mental health serious, especially when it came to girls. And she did a lot of her work in psychoanalysis, both in Vienna and in London after leaving Austria during World War II. The third person I want to mention is Lita Stetter Hollingworth. She was one of the early advocates of the field of psychology in the United States and researched women's psychology, intelligence, and gifted children. She was New York City's first civil service psychologist and worked at Bellevue Hospital running a psychological lab. At the time Hollingworth was doing her work, the variability hypothesis was in vogue, which stated that men occupied both the highest and lowest ends of the bell curve on both physical and psychological traits, and that women were locked into mediocrity in the middle. Like, women were not, even if a woman was, you know, was capable and competent and had all the qualifications to be on the higher level of the bell curve, which is like pay, salary, positions, titles, they still weren't given that opportunity. So women were viewed for a long time as mediocre, and especially, there's always the jokes about menstrual cycle. And for a long time, I remember people used to say, oh, a woman couldn't become president because she'll get upset during her PMS time of the month and then she'll do something crazy. And the reality is that's not true. That is not true at all. And I mean, if we look at all the presidents throughout history, we all have an opinion about presidency and who served our country, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, we can find fault in everyone because we're human beings, and we need to know that nobody's perfect. And a woman is going to be president one day, period. And I'm not going to say anything else about that. The fourth person that I want to talk about is Kay Redfield Jamison, sorry. She was a researcher and psychologist in the area of mood disorders and published a best-selling memoir detailing her own experiences with bipolar disorder. The the publication is called An Unquiet Mind. Now that is a very good book to read. So if you yourself have struggles with bipolar or know somebody who deals with bipolar disorder, that is a very good book to read to figure, understand more about what it does to your mind, your mood, some of the symptoms, the best way to treat it. The fifth person is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was a Swiss American psychiatrist and a pioneer in the field of near death studies. And she did a book on death and dying, is what it's called. She did actually more than 20 books about grief and loss and death and dying. So, and she did a bunch of other publications like articles and research and stuff. And then the last woman is Marie Neiswander. She developed the use of methadone for the treatment of heroin addiction, which is estimated to reduce the death rate of heroin addicts by 60%. So those are six individuals that pioneered in the field of mental health. And the other thing I want to share is five role models in mental health right now that are famous individuals that speak out. And there's actually a sixth one I just thought about. So the first one is Demi Lovato. We all know who she is, singer-songwriter. She has struggled with depression, bipolar disorder, self-harm, substance abuse, and bulimia. And if you want to know about any of those things more in detail, you can message me if you want, or you could look her up, her information, because it is public. The second is Zoe Sugg. She's a YouTube vlogger and an author, and she struggled with anxiety. Um, the third is Alexa Penavega, and she's an actress and she struggled with bulimia. The fourth is J.K. Rowling. Obviously, you know who she is, the author, Harry Potter, and she struggled with depression. And the last one listed here was Catherine Zeta Jones, actress, obviously, and she struggled with bipolar disorder. Um, the one comment they all made that was in sync was that if you're suffering, don't suffer in silence. Seek help, and there are people who can help you so you can better yourself. Basically, that's what they all said. Now, back to the most important part is that there's a lot of mental health issues that exist, but there are four mental health issues specifically that are more common in women. And so these are depression, anxiety, PTSD, and eating disorders, believe it or not. So, as I mentioned earlier, one in five American adults experience a mental health issue or illness during their lifetime. It could be triggered from some type of experience, grief and loss from losing a loved one, a bad car accident, a bad breakup, um, a issue at work. It could be anything, an issue with your child or your partner. So there's all kinds of experiences that can lead to mental health. So for depression specifically, 10 to 15% of women will experience depression at some point in their lives, which is double the number of men, believe it or not. A part of it is the biological, physiological changes we go through as women. You know, we go through puberty. Yes, men and women, boys and girls go through puberty. But after that, we get our period every month. If we get it, if we don't get our period every month and we have dysregulated hormones, that's a whole nother issue that can actually affect mental health. Then we have, we get pregnant and that affects us. Then after we have the baby, there's possibility of postpartum depression because of the hormonal dysregulation. And then when we get older, we have menopause, women. And during all that time, men don't have anything like that, except they do have, they do go through a phase where there's a little bit of mood changes. And it's when, we'll talk about that during Father's Day, probably. But anyway, so we have a lot of hormonal influxes and changes and variances that really play a role in physically changing us, which in turn changes our mental health. You know, like you can burst out in tears and crying for no reason if your hormones are all over the place. Especially like, as a disclaimer, I'm personally going through menopause right now, early, but I'm going through it. And I definitely have moments of emotional breakdowns and everything. And I will admit that because I'm human. Even though I'm a therapist, and I help people, I still am a human being. So it happens. Now, social issues also come into play because we as girls, young girls and boys, we're taught certain things like to shake it off. We're taught that we need to internalize and our thoughts and feelings, that we shouldn't be so vocal and verbal and expressive. um, and we're taught to be mindful about how we talk and how we carry ourselves. We're supposed to grow up little girls and become women and perfect wives and perfect mothers, and that's the societal norms, which is not true. You can be who you want to be, truthfully. And if you don't feel like washing the dishes, it's okay. you know if you don't want to do laundry today, then don't do laundry. The reality is that society puts a lot of pressures, and throughout history, there's been a lot of pressure on women to show up a certain way, to do things a certain way, and it causes a lot of stress that then causes us to fall into depression. Sometimes even to a point where we start to isolate. And COVID-19 hitting wasn't good because we had to isolate. It wasn't a choice. That choice was taken away from us for about a year. Um, but there's a lot of expectations of women that, if they don't meet those expectations, or if they don't feel like appreciated, or feel like the people in their home, their partner, their children, actually are grateful, and they don't say thank you. If it's just an expected behavior, and then they don't give positive feedback, a woman, it starts to take a toll on a woman, and you start feel underappreciated, undervalued, and can become depressed. If you're working, then you have to clean, then you have to cook, then you have to bring the kids here and bring them there and do so many things. Though you start taking care of yourself less. And if you start taking care of yourself less, then you start feeling less good about yourself, which in turn turns into low self-esteem, and then that causes depression. And so I'm going to give you some tips on how to improve depression for women. The second mental health disorder is anxiety. And so women are twice as likely as men to develop anxiety disorder. And the biggest symptoms for women with anxiety is increased worrying. So worrying all the time about everything. How are we going to pay the bills? How are we going to get food? How are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? Tension is another symptom. Exhaustion and fatigue is another symptom. And fear. Fear of things bad happening. And that all those four symptoms, I mean, there's more symptoms, but those are the four major ones um, associated with anxiety with women. So, social and cultural norms and daily life stressors contribute to women's anxiety, truthfully. And then men tend to externalize emotions while women tend to internalize them. And I want to stop there for a second because a lot of people, and this was a study that was done in 2012, a lot of people assume that um, men don't share emotions, women always express themselves. But the reality is, when it comes to mental health and and especially stress, and stress specifically, and anxiety, women actually internalize it more. They feel like, we, because I have felt like that in the past. I don't now, but we have felt that we have had to carry the load and handle everything. That we had to get up in the morning, even if we didn't want to. We had to go to work. We had to get dressed. We had to figure out how to pay the bills. We had to figure out how to get more groceries, because if not, then how we're going to feed the family. We carried the load, and then on top of that, you add the hormones again. So, um, so that's anxiety. The third was PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. And I, I wrote a book, or two books actually, on PTSD. And what I say is that post traumatic stress disorder causes both feelings of anxiety and depression. And the reason why is you're trying to manage and cope with the PTSD, the trauma that you experience. And the way you're trying to cope with it, it comes out as anxiety and disorder. I mean, anxiety and depression. Sorry about that. Um, and so that's you just trying to manage it. For instance, if you were traumatized in a specific environment, then you will get anxious anytime you go near that environment or street or house or family or friend or anything. The same thing with depression is whenever you have a traumatic experience, you can feel very low, sad. You might blame yourself. You might feel shame, depending on what type of trauma it is. And I won't get into that. Um, but um, there is a video on my YouTube channel that is about toxic relationships and PTSD. I will be doing future PTSD videos too. Now, so that's trauma. The last mental health disorder and illness is eating disorders. Some There are some men that deal with eating disorders, but primarily it's considered a woman's disease, believe it or not, which is not totally true, but it is it is there are more women that deal with women eating disorder. And a part of it is because there's an expectation that women are supposed to look a certain way. We're supposed to be a certain weight. We're supposed to, you know, have perfect hair, and we're supposed to have makeup, and we're supposed to dress nice and all this stuff. So because of that, there's this pressure, and some of it can be invisible sometimes, but the pressure nevertheless is there. So there's a lot of attention on vanity and self-control and perfection. And I, I'm glad that a lot of people are using all types of size models and styles of models, because the reality is that for a long time when I was growing up, all you would see in the magazines on TV is skinny models. That's it. You wouldn't see anybody else. And a lot of us are not skinny. We're all different shapes and sizes. And so that's important. Um, Kudos to Rihanna for using all types of models. She has her Savage Fenty X lingerie and underwear, and men's stuff. And the reality is that she has all sizes. Let's say if you want a panty and bra set, she has every size for all women, and she has models in the different sizes on her website. I appreciate that, because then it's removing the stigma and that pressure for us to look and be a certain way in order for us to buy nice things. And the reality is we all should have nice things and feel good about ourselves. So, but there is the pressure to look a certain type of way, which then causes us to have this pressure of eating a certain type of way, and which can cause us to not eat at all or to overeat. And a couple weeks ago, I did a live on emotional eating, and that is tied to anxiety and depression. And if you want to see it, it's on my YouTube channel. But eating disorder is the fourth mental health illness that affects women mostly. So for depression, back to depression, there are 7 tips that for women with depression that you can try to make yourself feel better. And this is to really address the social expectations, the natural hormones that are going on. And my suggestion as women with hormonal issues, please, 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 please talk to your doctor, your medical doctor about it, so that way they can help you regulate it somehow. But the 7 tips are really around self-care. The first is take your place in the sun. You should at least try to have 15 minutes a day in the sun. Go for a walk. Even if you're at work, take a break and go for a walk out in the sun. even if it is cold, depending where you live, still the sun really helps with mood and improving the feelings of depression. Especially seasonal depression here on the East Coast. You know, winter is horrible, and a lot of people get seasonal depression. So, 15 minutes in the sun. The second, try to exercise. Exercising is not only for weight, exercising also is for mood. It improves your mood. Hi, Cameron. It improves your mood. So, exercise, at least it says 20 to 30 minutes a day. What I would tell you is this: exercise for 5 minutes. 5 minutes in the morning. Give yourself 5 minutes and you will be fine. And try to get an accountability partner. So somebody that will message you in the morning, hey, did you do 5 minutes this morning? So you guys can hold each other accountable. The third tip, expand your support system. So you should have um, people in your life who are supportive to you and encouraging, that they actually make you want to be better, or just because when you talk to them they're doing exciting things and they encourage you, make you feel like, oh, I want to do that too. So they can be friends or family, but you determine who they are. And this is not to talk about mental health issues or your depression. This is just to lean on them to be your support, to do healthy coping strategies and other things like going to the movies or going bowling or just going to each other's house to watch a movie. I don't know. COVID is still somewhere out there. I know some people don't think it's true, but it is somewhere. You still have to be mindful of that. And it's not just COVID, it's other sicknesses too, like the flu and other things. The fourth self care tip is take support offline. So, social media, virtual meetups, and texting can all make you feel less alone. So, like, there are like TikTok. I'm on TikTok right now. There's a lot of positive TikTok videos that are out there. And you have to be careful because the algorithm, once you start looking at specific TikTok videos, it will feed you the same type of videos. So if you look at sad stuff, it will keep feeding you sad stuff. So try to look at more upbeat or like positive things. And remember that sometimes we get attracted to things that we can relate to. Like if you're sad, you listen to a sad song and that really makes you feel like, oh yeah, that's how I feel. But that actually keeps you sad. So stay away from that. You want to try to listen to happy things or engage in looking at things that are more positive. The fifth is give your body the fuel it needs. So make sure you have a balanced meal. Meaning, I'm not saying don't have junk food, because if you feel like you want to have chips, I've said that before, even during the emotional eating show, is that everything needs to be not you can't overdo it. So if you want to have chips, have a couple of chips just to handle that craving, or cookies. But you need to make sure that you're eating healthy, meaning that you have to have you have to have things with vitamins in it. You have to have, I'm not saying eat a salad every day, but you just have to make sure there's a balanced diet for yourself. And everybody's different, the way each of our bodies break down food. So, but give yourself fuel. Don't skip meals. If anything, you should be eating smaller meals 5 to 6 times a day. Number six, practice changing your thought patterns. So instead of staying in the negative thought pattern, feed your mind with positive things, motivational things. There's podcasts. There's so many amazing people out there that are really feeding you with information and encouragement and positive energy on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook, the Reels. I mean, so please find somebody that you could follow that you relate to. If you need some suggestions, just send me a message in my inbox. Number seven, if worst case scenario, you can't, the other six strategies don't help with your depression, um, talk with an expert, seek help. Like I said, if it's hormonal, you please talk to your medical doctor about it. Now, anxiety, which was the second mental health issue for women, is there are 6 tips to help with anxiety. The first one is obvious and is ironic: sleep. Okay. Which is interesting. And I said it ironic because if you have high anxiety, you are not going to be able to go to sleep. So you have to do something to calm your mind and disrupt the anxiety before you go to sleep. Because if you don't have a good night's sleep, anxiety is going to be high still. if that's what you're struggling with. Exercise again, and really because it gets rid of the nervous energy. For anxiety specifically, you could either do calming exercises like yoga and meditation to calm your anxiety, or to get rid of if it's like nervous, anxious energy that's more stewing, then you could do more cardio, more hit, high intensity training. The third one, I agree with half of it. It says less caffeine and alcohol. I'm gonna have caffeine. You know me, I love coffee, but the less alcohol, they're saying if you have anxiety, because the more caffeine you take in or alcohol, it actually triggers more anxiety, believe it or not. And remember also for alcohol, alcohol is also a depressant, which means that if you're already struggling with depression and you drink alcohol, it can make you feel more depressed. So be careful with that. Number four tip for lowering anxiety for women, yoga. I already mentioned that. So they're saying yoga specifically, get in a routine and a structured type of meditation or yoga. The fifth is scheduled day. Organize your day so you know what to expect and you plan it out so you can make sure you do the things that you need to do. Because some of the reason what causes anxiety for women is not being able to accomplish the things that you need to accomplish. But always, when you create a schedule or plan for your day, please, please, please make sure that it's realistic and that you can achieve it. Don't put everything you ever need to do on the list. And the last one, believe it or not, is socialize. So now healthy socialization. And that could mean you hanging out, going to visit your mom. It does not necessarily mean going to a party or a club or a bar. It just means healthy conversation, watching a movie, is engaging and interacting with someone else. And socializing really took a hit during COVID. So now we're relearning how to re-engage and socialize with people. So be mindful of that. Now, the third mental health issue was PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. And like many other conditions, PTSD in women is different, presents itself different than men. Okay. So this may be due to the fact that um, many different reasons. One is because women are more likely to be diagnosed with anxiety and depression rather than PTSD, believe it or not. Sometimes they'll go in and be evaluated and they're like, oh, you have anxiety and depression, but it's really trauma that they're experiencing, that they've experienced rather. Um, Let me see. So some things that you can do for PTSD, and PTSD is any type of traumatic experience that occurs. Some of the common ones, that common causes of PTSD in women is combat, so going to war in the military, um, abuse, and that's physical, sexual, witnessing a traumatic event, um, uh, a car accident or of you or a loved one, um, and natural disasters also is another one, and witnessing any type of violence or terrible event. Those are the most common causes for PTSD in women. Um, and what is the best way to manage it? So there are tips here, like obviously therapy. So, and there's different forms of therapy, specifically cognitive behavior therapy, which is really like talk therapy, and helps you to identify your thoughts, behaviors, and feelings, and how you can create a healthier pattern for yourself. And then there's other um, therapeutic styles, but some of the main tips they talk about again is yoga, meditation, exercise, like regular exercise or Tai Chi, journaling, getting a service dog or emotional support animal is also good. And those can be dogs or cats, truthfully. And having some type of creative outlet or hobby like gardening, painting, music, or writing. The last one is listen, women. This one's important. This is to help you set and enforce boundaries. One of my favorite boundary that I tell people to do is say no. You don't have to say yes to everything and you don't have to do everything. Okay? And then the last mental health issue that I is one of One of the main ones that affect women specifically is eating disorders. And there are three safe coping skills in eating disorder. Um, and so the first coping skill is seek understanding, not blame. You have to understand what is your issues with eating. What is the eating disorder you have? Why do you have it? And there is always a reason, and there's always a way to understand what your eating disorder is. So then, more understanding you have of it, the less you blame yourself. And there's, as I mentioned before, there's bulimia, there's anorexia, and then there's just a regular eating disorder. Um, and then the second coping strategy is see the picture all the way through to the end. When you're triggered with an eating disorder, you have tunnel vision for the food, the toilet, or the running path. So immediately what you need to do is follow the entire vision to the end, because if not, then you're just going to go to the toilet. But follow the entire vision of what you're seeing in your mind all the way to the end. That way you'll envision yourself being mad at yourself after, because it's happened before, and then you'll stop doing it. So that's why it says to follow it through all the way to the end. Three is trust the process. So recovery is not perfect, but improvement and progress is important. With eating disorder, I'm going to say from the beginning, seek professional help. You cannot handle that by yourself. Eating disorders are very impulsive, obsessive, and can be very, very dangerous. So you don't want to handle that by yourself. So hopefully, this was helpful. This was based on women's history and mental health, the women who have contributed as pioneers, the issues that we as women have faced in regards to mental health and mental health awareness and people taking it seriously, and the four major mental health issues that we deal with and strategies to handle it. Thank you for joining me again. And till next Sunday, have a great evening and thank you again.